So welcome everyone to our fourth Beyond Air webinar. A warm welcome from my side. My name is Claudia Carpanese and I work at the University of Graz, and I will be moderating today's webinar. So for those of you who are not familiar with Beyond Air, it is a conversation platform that brings together different people from different backgrounds and expertise, professions and discipline. We try to promote an honest debate about critical raw materials extraction for the energy transition. In doing so, we aim to challenge false assumption, empty promises, and misleading information. We have a website that Marlene kindly will put the link in the chat. And we have a core group of people taking care of our content. And also we have an expanded network of interested people, including academics from different disciplines, indigenous scholars and activists, as well as private sector and government officials. So we are also delighted to continue expanding this network and to include as many perspectives as possible to reach these conversations. Our first three webinars, we explore different topics from a range of perspectives, including social license to operate, the role of strategic impact assessment in the making, and a discussion on the geopolitics of lithium in Chile. You can find the recording of these webinars as well as more information on this on our website. So let's start with today's webinar, and we will discuss today the role of crime in mineral supply chain and why it is important to include this dimension when talking about responsible mining. So as we know, the demand for this mineral is increasing and they all have complex supply chain. And this complexity can create opportunities for corruption, illegal trade, trafficking, and financial crime. The impact can be very serious for people and also for the environment, contributing to deforestation, pollution, and other forms of environmental destruction. For this conversation, I'm more than happy to bring together two experts from international organizations with extensive experience working on these issues. Through this conversation, we aim to bring to better understand the role of crime and criminal actors, as well as the environmental, social, and global security implications involved. We will also explore which tools, standards, and approaches can help governments, companies, and other stakeholders prevent, detect, and respond to these risks. So about the structure of today's webinar, shortly, I will first introduce the speaker, then we will have a discussion of about 25 minutes, and then after that, I will open the floor for questions from you. You can post your question in the chat as we go along, but we will respond to them only after the discussion. The webinar is being recorded and it would be later available on our Beyond.here website, except the Q&A session that will not be recorded. So now I'm delighted to introduce our two speakers. So Tanya Wyatt is the lead researcher on crimes that affect the environment at UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And Luca Maiotti is a policy analyst at the Center for Responsible Business Conduct at the OECD, based in Paris. Well, Tanya is based in Vienna. So I'd like to welcome you first, Tanya, to give your opening statement. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, Claudia, and to everyone part of the Beyond Hot Air initiative. Thanks for bringing together a group of people to talk about this really important and obviously very timely topic. So I just start at the bit about me and what we're doing here at UNODC in this space around critical minerals. So I've had several chapters of my life. I started as a police officer many years ago, and then actually moved in to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine. And then I moved into academia where I became a criminologist. And I consider myself a green criminologist. So I focused my career on environmental crime, or crimes that affect the environment, as we call them here at UNODC. So I've spent the last 20 years doing research on these very topics, looking at it from an angle particularly around why organized crime gets involved in environmental crime. What are the conditions that attract those kinds of organizations to this space? And then what do we do about it? Because really, we want to have, myself as a researcher and other green criminologists, I would argue, really want to help the planet and to solve this. And so I came to UNODC almost 4 years ago now, as this is a somewhat new topic in this international space. We've been doing wildlife trafficking research since about 2014, but minerals crime, as we've sort of created this category that we talk about, has been happening for probably just the last 4 or so years. And we've produced 2 studies that I'll talk about more in the coming minutes, but particularly one that Claudia was key in producing. In September, we published about minerals crime, specifically around critical minerals. And our aim is to provide a good evidence base for all of the United Nations member states, as we call them, so the countries that are party to the United Nations, to make informed decisions about what is the intersection between crime, organized crime in particular, and these kinds of supply chains.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Sorry, I missed my mouse. Thank you so much for this nice introduction. And I'm also happy to welcome Luca. Would you like also to open your statement?
Sure. Thanks, Claudia, and thanks for the consortium of universities that is convening today's Beyond Hot Air webinar. My name is Luca Maiotti, and I am a policy analyst in the minerals team of the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct. I joined the OECD about 9 years ago, and I've had a couple of stints in 2 other international organizations, the European External Action Service and the Financial Action Task Force. I've always been interested in the intersection between financial crimes with environmental crimes, and I was curious to see how international organizations could bring their contribution to solving this sort of conundrum of how to disentangle this link. At the OECD, I work in this OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, which works as a secretariat for a series of government-backed instruments for companies on responsible business conduct. So these form a set of expectations that were first formulated in 1976 and then updated 6 times since on how companies should behave when conducting business. We do 3 types of things. On the one hand, there is research. We publish reports on specific supply chains that merit particular scrutiny, or specific risks of adverse impacts that should not be overlooked, but also accompanying documents on how companies and governments can better facilitate the implementation of these responsible business conduct instruments. The second type of things that we do is policy advice. This is where typically governments want to regulate, for example, their mineral producing or importing sector, and they can turn to us to, for example, share experiences and good practices. But it's also the case that some industry associations want to self-regulate or impose internal rules for their members, and they also turn to us to align with OECD responsible sourcing expectations. And then the third type of things that we do is convening. We try to we have different types of convening, though some of you may be familiar or may have attended the OECD Forum on Responsible Mineral Supply Chains that usually takes place in spring in Paris. But also more discrete convening on, for example, for certain policy communities or people in certain supply chains. And that is all for me now.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you both. It was a great introduction to the topic. So let's start off with so we're talking about crime and minerals crime. So Tanya, what are these crime? What types of crime occur along the supply chains of critical raw materials?
Yeah, I think it may be more complicated than it sounds. We're talking about crime, which maybe we think is straightforward, but for minerals, it becomes really complicated. Not only because you have complicated supply chains, but you also have just this patchwork of where the supply is, where the demand is. So there's these layers of complication. So what technically is a crime always depends on national legislation. So crime is very dependent on which country we're talking about. We did a study here in the research branch of UNODC to try to map this about where a violation of a law is a crime or not related to minerals. And we found that this is one where it's less than in other spaces of environmental crime. So waste and wildlife, we have a lot of countries that consider violations crimes, but for minerals, we don't have so much. And what those specific offenses that we're looking at, are they a crime or not, particularly around illegal mining. So if we're just talking at the supply chain or the supply side of this whole complicated chain, so is it actually a crime to be taking minerals out of the earth without a license, for instance? Or what kind of license needs to be given? This has a lot to do with, is it a national park? Is it a national protected area? Is it indigenous territory? This is a huge issue throughout Latin America. So that's one element of it. But then if we move down the supply chain, just kind of big picture looking, there's all of these kinds of licenses and documents along. And we see corruption as one of the crimes being committed all along this chain. So perhaps that's fraudulent import or export documents. Is it a bribe being paid to a customs officer or a middle person along there? There could be violations of other kinds of laws in that early part of the supply. We know that there are issues around fraudulent land use permits, actually. So coming in to actually mine it all might have happened. A crime might have happened before that. Obviously, there's the environmental crimes that are attached to mining, but also illegal mining. If we were talking about gold, we would say mercury, cyanide, those sorts of use of those chemicals, which is banned for the most part. But critical minerals also have lots of chemicals and environmental implications that might be crimes. And then we have, if we keep moving down the supply chain, all of that smuggling and trafficking that might be going on. So have all of the due diligence procedures been complied with? And Luca can speak much more in detail about that, if that's a crime or not, or that. So it's actually really quite complicated. And that's just the sort of, I would say, documentation or environmental aspects. And then we have all of the human rights issues that come along with these, of perhaps the labor force that's actually doing the illegal mining have been subjected to some kind of labor rights violations. We know there's instances of human trafficking to actually illegal mine, but also then just the support services around some of these mining camps also might have trafficking in persons crime related there as well. And then we could also go on a whole other probably conversation about the financial crimes, the money laundering that sits this. I see a question in the chat about corporate crime. Yes, absolutely. I would say that the offenders in this space are often businesses, but there's this really messy blend with organized crime in the more traditional sense that we might think of. But definitely we have businesses being implicated in all of this. Thanks for pointing that out, Anna. And then we could talk about child labor, forced labor as well, but that's just sort of the big picture. I think Luca has a lot of the more richer details about some of the specifics and good examples. Yeah.
I mean, I think this, what you said, Tanya, really resonated with us. There's sometimes existing gap between the adverse impacts that we see on the ground, with the extent to which the states decide to criminalize or not some of these adverse impacts. And that is also why in responsible business conduct, OECD responsible business conduct instruments, we usually talk about risks of adverse impacts, and these risks are potential, and this is why we ask companies to conduct due diligence, map their supply chains, and try to identify the potential for these risks. But sometimes they're also actual. And so when this is happening, there is not only mitigation, but also remediation that is required for companies, to be implemented by companies. But yeah, I mean, in general, the instrument that I work more closely with, which is the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible mineral supply chains, tries to prioritize the wide array of potential adverse impacts that Tanya already eloquently exposed, and tries to focus on serious human rights abuses, so including, for example, worst forms of child labor, bonded labor, torture, widespread sex violence, sexual violence, and then conflict financing. So this is the financing of non-state armed groups, as well as sometimes financing of, for example, either private sector armed groups, security guards, for example, that may be exposed to risks of human rights abuses, and same goes for state armed forces. And then the whole area of financial crimes, so fraud, corruption, money laundering, tax evasion, and this is something that we see happening a lot across the whole of the supply chain. So many of the existing literature may focus on the extraction, on the mining stage, but as Tanya was saying, we try to take this more holistic view of a supply chain angle, and this is where the connection between corporate crime and organized crime as well, the central play plays out, and so. Just to give you one example, according to an NGO, a Swiss NGO, it was calculated that in 2022, 435 tons of gold were smuggled out of Africa, which is the equivalent of over $30 billion for that year. And so this is as well a huge gap for domestic revenue mobilization and all that money that could go to things such as health services, for example, or education.
Thank you both for the clear overview. And Luca, just to go back to the type of crimes that you both clearly express, that are very complex, and the supply chain is actually also complex and diverse. Do you have any experience of what kind of crimes have you encountered in your experience? If you can give us a couple of examples.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if the question was for me, but
yes.
Yeah, there are of course many types. When it comes to, for example, the fraud may seem one of the, for example, victimless crimes, but this is, this deprives states of fundamental revenues that, as I said, may be invested somewhere else. The whole issue of conflict financing is a particularly difficult one. We have seen, for example, coltan, so the mineral, the ore for tantalum, that has been financing armed groups in eastern DRC right now. So it is calculated that these earn $800,000 per month just through taxing mineral trade, and this is contributing to perpetuating a state of conflict in some of these areas, although we know that some of these these groups also have different revenue streams. The issue of terrorist financing is also one that is often mentioned, although it is, I think, more prominent, at least in terms of the evidence that we've seen for gold. And as Tanya was saying, I think corruption is the crime that is always sort of present here. It's not only a crime in itself, but a crime that facilitates other crimes, often with the severe effects to the environment or the people.
Thank you both, and thank you for adding some other examples. Now, we already started to talk a little bit more of what are the impacts. So we understand that these are serious issues. And so Tanya, going back to you, what impacts do they have, not only socially, but also on the environment? If you can, we can elaborate more on this topic.
Yeah, I think this is a space where we need to even have more research, as it is a bit of an emerging field. And for me, I think we need to speak much more to the communities that are impacted by this, because they're really bearing the brunt of the environmental and social types of impacts. But what we do know so far is that there are, if we break it down into categories, that it has impacts on all sort of social aspects of life. So we know that particularly in minerals that need to have chemical extraction, that there is huge public health implications for the communities where this is happening. And, debatable if gold is a critical mineral or not, but we know a lot about the contamination from mercury in different parts of the world where this is happening. This has been documented throughout South America, in Peru and Bolivia in particular, around the contamination of water sources that then communities are, they have a toxic water around them, basically. So you have WHO going in and testing communities in these places near mines, and the mercury levels of people's bloods is just well above anything that should be allowed. So there's real health security issues, I think, with mining and that's hopefully legal mining is following good protocols, having environmental protection. But where we have illegal mining, this is where there isn't these kinds of checks and balances and oversight that mining is happening in a safe kind of way. So health in environmental areas. So environmentally, we know we've had some studies at UNODC in the Brazilian Amazon, for instance, that have shown that to get to illegal mine, we've probably had illegal deforestation or illegal logging. So there's very concrete environmental damage there that obviously has wider implications for biodiversity loss, climate change, so much more far-reaching environmental impacts. As Luca was talking about, though, there's economic impacts for these communities of loss of revenue, loss of incomes, loss of jobs, potentially. So there's also real financial implications at the community level, but then huge implications for a nation. If you're losing $800,000 a month that could go to healthcare, infrastructure, education, it has real impacts on sustainable development that are not often part of the conversation. So that's part of the push, is that crime and organized crime are also derailing our ability to meet the sustainable development goals, in addition to the other reasons we're not meeting them. And then Luca also touched on it, and I'll just briefly end on that before turning it over to him for that, is the issue around physical security of the communities and conflict. We know in particular that minerals that are being illegally mined in Africa are cause of conflict, contributing to conflict, part of it, just any kind of sort of variable around conflict, minerals can play this kind of role. So there's real implications for violence in these places linked to minerals as well. And as I said, I think Luca can elaborate more on some concrete examples from the great work at OECD. Thanks.
I mean, it's just to build up on what you were saying. I mean, the impacts are clearly there in the example that I brought up before. So on this rebel group that has taken over the coltan producing areas in the eastern DRC. I mean, this is not only so this is the area where, unfortunately, just in February 2026, there was a huge landslide because of uncontrolled mining that killed over 200 people there, followed by another landslide that killed around the same amount just a month right after. So there are these impacts are, of course, interconnected and are touching on both the physical security of the people, the environment, and the sort of financial integrity of the state and the market. When we talk about, I mean, Tanya, you were mentioning how some of the environmental impacts are there again, multidimensional. The case of the Zambia's spill in Kitwe was, to me, is kind of a telling one. The mismanagement of this dam from I think it's a copper mine led to this massive landslide of mud and toxic slurry that invested the surrounding villages, the surrounding areas with, the farmers saying that it affected over 300,000 people, 300,000 households in this region. So with toxic spillage touching on groundwater, waterways, which will again cause other types of widespread impacts. So this is something that will probably lead to loss of life for many years coming. And then just once again, bouncing off on financial crimes, I think corruption, as I said, is always purported as the victimless crime. But one example that, again, from the DRC is a middleman that was sanctioned by the U.S. and Department of Justice, where allegedly he helped through his close friendship with the Congolese former president. He helped mining companies to obtain access to extremely rich deposits at lower, let's say, less than the market rate, and so as a result of these deals, the underpricing. So with a kickback to both him and some of the people he was in the government he was in contact with, led to the underpricing of these assets for over $1.3 billion dollars in revenue just in 2 years, which that $1.3 billion dollars would have funded almost half of the country's health budget. So once again, these impacts, these adverse impacts have very direct impacts on human life, the environment, and the broader society.
Thank you so much for giving us this rich insight that I hope it helps understand better the seriousness of these issues and why it's so important to talk also about crime when considering responsible mining. And now we move more towards solutions. So this is also in practicality, what is your mandate, your work is about, right? To produce, I mean, over to you, Tanya, but to produce research that is also helping to sustain governments and member states. So on these, based on your experience and research, which approaches or solution have proven effective in preventing or detecting and responding to this crime?
Yeah, thank you. So I think focus on two elements. I think there's like the very big picture that we deal with here in Vienna. So as the guardian of the Organized Crime Convention, UNODC does this research, as Claudia rightly said, to provide this evidence base so that member states, the countries of the UN, can maybe improve their policies or improve their approaches. And obviously that's very high level. And those discussions are happening now about how should crimes that affect the environment, minerals crime included, be treated as a global community? What can we do to, we realize that there's this problem, what should we do about it? So as I said, very big picture kind of approach is, I think, multifaceted. So partly dealing with Martin's question in the chat, and thanks for joining, Martin. Nice to see you again. That it isn't just about crime is only one of the possibilities that we should be talking about here, and it should be about the most severe kinds of cases, those organized crime where there's a tremendous amount of harm, economic, environmental, all of it. So there, a criminalization might be appropriate to deter further activity, to protect the environment and people. But that's only part of the response. There also needs to be those regulatory, administrative, civil, however legislation we want to talk about that I think speaks to what Luca and colleagues are working on around the due diligence and corporate responsibility, and that is part of it. So crime is just one piece of it. So there's that element to it. But I think that we don't have enough evidence yet, but I'd really like to move in the direction of alternative livelihoods and alternative development. We have a huge history of this in UNODC for illicit crops. So providing people who are drawn into criminality in the drug space, giving them other opportunities to support themselves. And I think this is the same that we need to help those who might be exploited into participating in illegal mining. And that could be more of the artisanal, small-scale miners, individuals. But those are not the people that we're suggesting should be criminalized. We really are, in the crime debate, talking about the big corporate organized. There is where we need possibly a criminal response as part of a much broader framework. But I don't mean to avoid the question, Claudia, but I don't know that we know what works yet. I think that there's still a lot of evidence to be gathered about how we can stop illegal mining in general. But I think that there's lessons to be learned, as I said, like from drug trafficking or other spaces about how we can at least help those people who are being exploited into this industry to get them away from it. I think the corporate organized crime, how we prevent that, is a deeper discussion that we haven't really figured out yet. That's very unappealing. Sorry.
No, thank you, Tanya. I think it's also honest and good to say that we're not there yet, or we don't know yet, and also to encourage like more research in this direction, right? Now, over to you, Luca. What is your perspective on this?
No. I mean, I think I agree, and the part of the difficulty is that every supply chain is so context specific, and of course has its own geographies and its own characteristics. So solutions in the copper supply chain may be completely different from the antimony because simply the players are not the same, or the geographies are not the same. What us at the OECD do is trying to complement the approach that is brought forward by the state in terms of, for example, enforcing the law by embarking the private sector in limiting their contribution to these adverse impacts. And so the idea is that there is a shared responsibility of the supply chain for the impacts that are taking place, sometimes many tiers away from the companies that are implementing due diligence. And of course, their exposure to the risk will determine a different intensity of their due diligence exercise. In short, these OECD instruments expect companies to set up management systems to understand where the minerals they're buying are actually coming from. And then looking at their supply chains, companies should identify some of these adverse impacts they may be linked. And when they do so, and this is also sort of trying to address one of the questions in the chat, they should prioritize them in order of let's say, on a risk-based approach. So the harder, the more immediate the risk, the more serious the risk, the earliest this should be addressed. And this is the sort of the third part, which is the mitigation. And mitigation could look like many different ways. It could look like a suspension or interrupting the business relationship, but also signaling to the supplier that some changes need to be happening in order for the relationship to continue, and incentivizing sometimes progressive change with clear timelines and clear benchmarks for improvement. Once these mitigation measures are in place, there will be a part of tracking if these are actually working. And then the fifth step of this due diligence process is to transparently disclose on the first 5 steps. So what happened during the due diligence process? What were the risks that were identified? What were the mitigation measures? In some cases, for impacts that the company may have caused or contributed to, these companies are also expected to remediate, so provide remediation. Does it work? That is I think, $1 billion question. We have recently conducted research that we're going to publish in July on the effect of a due diligence program covering the east of the DRC, eastern part of the DRC. And the results are that there was a reduction of over 60% of conflict in those areas, which is very encouraging. This points to a very positive results. Of course, this does never come alone. These positive results, this due diligence program, this due diligence intervention has also been associated with fraud and smuggling allegations over the years, for which they opened incidents. So now the idea is to understand how these two results may be reconciled. It's obviously a nuanced result, a mostly positive one, I would say. And for the first time, I think, a quantitative study on the reduction of violence following causality, a due diligence intervention.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think we can discuss way further this topic as we just started to understand which are the crimes, what are the impacts, and also some possible, based on your experience, what have you seen working and where we don't know yet. I'm asking you because before moving to the Q&A, which will not be recorded, I'm asking you if you have a final statement or final words that you would like to say that you think was not maybe addressed, that may be still important to say.
Thanks, Claudia. Yeah, I think, a big, quick scattershot discussion on it. I think we've probably covered it pretty well. I would just probably, I would love to, if you could pop the study you just mentioned, Luca, in the chat, because I think it'd be worth looking at on our end as well, if it's possible. So I do think that sort of is the next kind of step, and probably just to reiterate what Luca said around that every mineral is going to be different. There's regional differences as well, and the regional differences that you, Claudia, lovely documented in our minerals crime study, it's that the actors in different regions aren't the same either. And for us, with our focus on organized crime at UNODC, organized crime in Latin America looks very different than organized crime in Africa or Asia. So there does have to really be context-specific approaches, and it's maybe repetitive to say at this point, but a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work, and we really do have to know the intricacies of a certain area to be able to support them in protecting their environment from this kind of activity. Thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, on my side, I think much has been said, but maybe a reminder that especially when it comes to critical minerals, the reason why we want to tackle adverse impacts and, for example, including corruption, is not only because it is the right thing to do, but also because we have seen how all these ESG-related controversies have delayed, for example, the opening of mines. They have created lawsuits. They have created a space for arbitrary enforcement of the law, and worker strikes and protests by communities when meaningful consultation was not done. So this is not only important in itself, so because it's the right thing to do, but also because it will prevent us from, for example, accessing the minerals that are needed for the energy transition.
Thank you so much for both of you.